Hey y'all, how's it going this morning? It's a Monday morning, I'm about to get to work, and I stumbled on a story that I thought you all might enjoy, so I figured I'd knock that out this morning and post it this afternoon. So, alright, here we go. This is a secondhand story from my friend Tom in Arizona. He sends me emails and is good enough to share stories with me from his travels back to Louisiana, and some secondhand stories and things he's experienced that are quite interesting. My mother had an aunt named Eileen who married into a Scottish clan that lived near the little town of Bernice, Louisiana. Eileen was quite a colorful character, and she and her husband and many of the family up there were notorious for being involved in moonshining and other kinds of activities in the old days. Of course, in those long-gone old days, just about everyone in the area were involved in some shenanigans, just trying to supplement their income from farming to make ends meet. The family were early pioneers that settled in the area in what later became the town of Bernice in 1899. They also settled and occupied some parts of the land from Bernice to the Arkansas border 15 miles north. They were a large, rambunctious family when I knew them, and my mom and I visited regularly in the 1970s to the early 1980s. I've got a chicken squawking out here. It's kind of nice this morning, and I've got my door open. It's mist and rain and not too hot. And of course, when I open the door, the chickens all gather around it. Can't help it. Back to the story. Eileen was already a widow when I was a kid. She had a couple of daughters and sons, and there were already several grandkids on the scene, plus numerous cousins that were around my age. Almost every weekend there was a big clan gathering at her house, with her being the matriarch, and she held court in her kitchen. On any given weekend, the gathering could amount to 20 or 30 people. Aunt Eileen lived in a big and partially dilapidated late Victorian-era house on the northwest side of Bernice. Her home and several acres of land was at the end of the old roads that backed up to heavily wooded tracks that were full of trails that during the daylight we would explore. Some were from dirt bikes, but others were well used, but I would not say by people. The house was old and had rooms that had been added on at different times, so it was a bit of a hodgepodge. The main house was lifted 5 feet off the ground with brick piers, while the back of the house was 2 feet off the ground. Sometime during its ancient past, it had a detached kitchen, which was usual for the time. That was abandoned, and an indoor kitchen was added that ran the length of the back of the house, and all of its main doors had heavy drop bar latches. There were rooms jutting out here and there. They were obviously added on when the need arose. The feature I remember the most was a solid oak flooring that ran throughout the main house. It had high and low places where the house had settled around the piers, but was as solid as ever. I also remember the massive German Gothic foot pump pipe organ. It was so old and large it looked like the house had been built around it. The property also had the usual collection of sheds and outbuildings containing old trucks and tractors and cars and an old barn that one always finds around such houses. One of the older kids, Jim, had also moved a 50-foot-long house trailer out on the far west edge of the property against the tree line sometime around 1982. In addition to the outbuildings, the house had many dogs of various breeds and mixes that lived under the house and would come piling out from various openings at the least bit of noise or a vehicle pulling up. The house and land always had a weird, uneasy feeling to them, like something wasn't quite right and didn't belong in the modern world. During a storm or on a very cold night, the air itself was frosting inside when there was no reason for it to be doing so. It was like you were outside in below freezing temperatures, but you were inside with the gas heaters on at full blast. On several occasions, when all the kids were sleeping in the big rooms and the moms and smaller kids were sleeping, sometimes 4 to a bed, we were woken up by noises of the walls of the house cracking like something was pushing on them, and we saw large shadows moving around the windows in the moonlight. This would be followed by adults rushing in to check the windows while the other adults and dogs ran outside with lanterns. The bottom of the windows were 7 feet off the ground, and the shadows we saw with the moonlight behind them would have had to have been 10 to 11 feet tall. I'm fixing to throw something at this chicken. There she goes. This happened several times after midnight, so there were always a couple of adults sitting in the living room by the fireplace talking until the early hours of the morning. One of these times, the entire house was woken up by the sound of rifle shots from the west side of the house, and the dogs were going insane. They were howling and barking, and there was some other animal howling and screaming in the woods to the northwest. When everything had settled down, the oldest son, Jim, who was living in the trailer with his new wife, said they had been woken up by the trailer being shaken and rocked. He thought it had been a storm at first, and he stepped out with a flashlight. He saw the beast 20 feet away at the end of the trailer, grappling it and rocking it like it was trying to turn it over. He flashed the beast with the flashlight, which made the creature scream at him, and then it picked up a piece of kindling from the woodpile and it threw it at him. Jim jumped back and went into the trailer and grabbed his hunting rifle and started shooting at the beast. And that was when all hell broke loose and the entire household was awake. The dogs were raising full alarm but would not go into the tree line, and they kept running back and forth along the cleared area. The daylight showed that the end of the trailer pointing towards the woods was badly dented, and the ground was churned up, and the anchor straps at the end were partially pulled up, and there was a musky stink all around the area. That was a Saturday night, but the next day all was quiet and subdued, with the parents keeping watch and telling the kids to stay out of the woods and close to the house. Several of the men were in the barn for a few hours before they trooped off into the woods, and they returned in the late afternoon, but they never said anything about what they had been doing. And this was also our last weekend trip to Bernice, Louisiana. Oh, I love these old stories. I love the old stories, and I can identify with the memories that Tom has because when I was a little kid growing up, all of my on my father's side, all of our people were from down around Amory and Smithville and Nettleton and that area. And we would all go stay with my aunt and uncle who lived in one of these houses that he described off in the Tom Bigby River bottoms. It was one of those houses that just looked like it was going to fall apart. But inside, it was well maintained. My aunt was a meticulous housekeeper, and it was nice and warm, and it wasn't cool in the summertime because they didn't have AC, but all the windows would be open, and sometimes they would have fans in the windows, in one window and another one in the other side of the house, and they were exchanging air, and we could walk down the road and go brim fishing and just all kinds of fun as a kid. But I remember at night that house being real noisy and creaky, and I don't remember it scaring me, but it was just a great memory. And they had this cool artesian well right out the back door, kind of off to the right a little bit if you're looking at the back of the house. And that well run nonstop, and they had shoved a pipe down in it, and it came up elbowed over, and the pipe was sawed off, and that water just constantly ran all the time. And in the summertime, when it was 100 degrees, that water was so cold and cool. It had that sulfur kind of smell, taste to it, but I love drinking that water. And so anyway, those are some of my memories, and his story just kind of sparked that for me, and I don't know why I told you. I just thought I'd tell you about it. Some of my best memories were at my Aunt Irma's house. Her name was Irma, Irma, and we called her Aunt Irma. And that's the way we talked, and that's what we called her. And my son is named after her husband, who was my blood kin uncle. And so his name was Bryant, Bryant. And for some reason, I always loved that name. And so we named our son Bryant. That's my youngest son. So anyway, that's a lot of rambling, saying nothing, but I thought I would put this story out there because I knew you would enjoy it. And I hope you did enjoy it. If you like this video, maybe you can subscribe. I think this is maybe the second or third time in the history of the Dixie Cryptid channel I've asked people to subscribe. I don't know why I'm doing it now. It just popped in my head. And you know me, squirrel! If something pops in my head, usually I say it. Although I do have some discernment, and if something bad pops in my head, I can keep check on that. But anyway, there's your video. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Thanks.